Welcome to the FasCat Podcast. I'm your host, Frank Overton. Some call me the Big Cat.
And I'm Jackson Long, and your phone is ringing.
And today we are doing a live Q&A podcast. We are taking your questions. We've got over 8 curated questions here sent in by you all out in podcast land. Thank you very much. And we're going to answer them or try to answer them and hopefully cover a few topics that you've been wondering about. We are live on Facebook, so if you want to submit your questions there, we have Coach Jake in the house. Hey, Jake. And if they are good enough that we can think about it while we're podcasting on the fly, we will answer those as well during this podcast.
Cool. Yeah, so that, again, just to remind you all, every month, every 4 weeks, we do a Q&A podcast, so stay tuned for more information on the forum eventually so we can submit those questions. But feel free to always send us in questions and all of that so that we can, have a good compiled list.
Yes.
To answer on next month's podcast.
Yeah, and in 4 weeks' time when we do a Q&A again, we'll actually have our forum up and running, and you could submit your questions in advance as soon as our forum is live. When is that going to be live? We are thinking next Tuesday or Wednesday. Firm. Like, we're in the final stages of having our forum all ready to go. And as soon as it's G to G, we'll crow about it on the socials and in our emails and, of course, on our next podcast. And we'll let you know where you can go to engage our endurance community. And you can ask questions, and then we'll get it going. I'm excited about that.
Yeah. We have a review to read.
Review of the week.
Review of the week. All right. You want to do it?
Okay. This review is from Steve Hamilton, April 10th, 2019. And he did the Sweet Spot Part 1, the 6 weeks to Sweet Spot Part 1. That was our original training plan. And he says, my first training plan and just completed Beginner Sweet Spot Part 1. I followed the plan almost perfectly and increased my FTP by 7%. Ready to start Sweet Spot 2. The plan is doable for a busy dad balancing work life, includes daily emails of workouts, and integrates the training peaks. Great. I highly recommend this plan if you want to increase performance.
Sweet.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for the review. That was 5 stars, by the way. If any of y'all want to go check out our reviews, we have over 250, I haven't even counted, 5-star reviews on the product pages of our training plans, user-generated, and read what they have to say about their training plans, how much watts they increased, how balanced and realistic they are, and just, what they're saying. And as always, 25 Podcast gets you 25% off your first training plan.
Sweet. Anything else we needed to talk about before we dive into the episode? Probably not.
Let's get into it.
All right. Let's just start it.
All right.
Question number 1. Do you recommend gels with or without caffeine? From Corey. He's asking about last week. We're talking about on-bike nutrition, and we kind of mentioned caffeinated gels, but we didn't really go into too much depth. So if so, should you limit the caffeine, or should each gel contain it? Thoughts on this?
Yeah, big fan of caffeine, not only in my coffee, but in my gels, but not all one or the other. So a good way to think about it is go to those gels or blocks with caffeine in the last hour of your race or training ride to give you that little extra boost. It's an ergogenic aid. It's well established in the literature. Caffeine can help you, kind of push through. It's kind of the same rationale as having a Coca-Cola at the end of a race or a ride. One thing I don't think you want to do is start hitting the caffeinated gels at the beginning of the ride. Caffeine is a diuretic, and theoretically it could. You don't want to get dehydrated from taking gels, for 5 hours, in a long ride. So hang on, have the non-caffeinated gels and blocks at the beginning, and then towards the end hit them. What do you have thoughts
Yeah, I
on
mean,
that?
I definitely echo what you have to say. I think the problem with caffeinated gels, like you said early on in rides, is that once you start with the caffeine, you have to keep going to keep that caffeine kind of hit going. And like you said, caffeine is a performance enhancing substance. It's been shown to increase, time to exhaustion and other markers of performance. And I mean, for some people too, I know a lot of cyclists that really don't drink a lot of caffeine on a daily basis. They save the caffeine for race day with caffeinated gels so that they can like maximize the amount of benefit that they get, because as we know from you or me who drink a lot of coffee, you build up a tolerance like any other sort of like drug essentially, and so you have to weigh that too. If you're really concerned about getting the performance benefits of caffeine, maybe take it. Maybe don't drink as much caffeine or use as much caffeine until race day. So,
yeah, I used to have a teammate long ago, and they stopped drinking coffee in the morning, and it was like a big deal. And I asked them why they were doing it, and they said they wanted to benefit from the caffeine they were going to have in their gels in the last hour of their race.
Exactly.
So, me, I drink so much coffee that I don't really notice the caffeine from my gels. Maybe just a smidgen, but
save it for the end.
Yeah, save it for the end.
All right, number 2 from Cole in Adelaide, South Australia. He asks,
G'day, mate.
G'day, mate. He asks, can I continue to race during the sweet spot training phase, as we race pretty much all year round here? He's looking at an A race. His A race is a Fondo in September. And so he, has a basic plan in place for the next 12 weeks, but he wants to do sweet spot training running up to it.
Yeah, I think that is totally fine, especially if that is not an A race.
Yeah.
Sweet spot is really good training. It'll, having a big aerobic engine is probably the single most important thing you could do for your cycling performance, in my opinion. If it's an A race, do your sweet spot training, but leave room for your interval training before your A race, because the two combined together, building a big base and then doing race specific intervals, nets you the best performance. And if it's an A race, do that. But if it's a B or C race, absolutely, sweet spot leaves most athletes with increased FTP, just feeling good and sharp.
Yeah, and I would definitely recommend going back to, if you haven't already, listening to our episode that we did probably at this point maybe a month or two ago, where we talk about intervals and kind of like structuring the training plan.
Switching from base to race.
Switching from base to race, because that, I think we talk about this exact thing where it's like, okay, well, if you have this much time before your A race, when should you cut off the sweet spot, switch to intervals? When should you switch from intervals into tapering and all of that? So I think that you can glean some knowledge from that.
Okay, thanks for your question, Call.
All right, next question. Number 3 comes from Dave in our private Facebook group, and Joe from our YouTube channel. What about fasting?
Oh boy.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I just want, before Jackson has a lot of experience, I just want to say I'm not a fan.
Yeah.
So if you want to fast forward, I don't recommend it, because Jackson's about to drop some knowledge on you.
Well, I think again, this is one of those topics in nutrition and science in general. It's not very cut and dry, black and white. Like, it's not either bad or good, or like there's like a hard and fast like rationale for it. I think fasting, in my opinion, has a time and place. There's a lot of really well-established literature for non-athletes that it can help, well-planned, healthy, conscious fasting routines built into your kind of like macro scale of your diet can actually be beneficial for increasing your health span and longevity and preventing disease and all of that. But I'm obviously, this is a cycling podcast. We're talking about cycling and exercise performance and
going faster.
And fasting is, it's this kind of hot topic in the world of cycling and exercise. And I think, looking at the data in the literature, that it's been studied extensively. And, I think a lot of people point to like, well, fat adaptation and, increasing fat as fuel. And, what the data show is that while you can increase your fat oxidation and fat adaptation by doing fasted training rides and stuff, it's a wash when it comes to enhanced exercise performance. So even if one group that's doing the fasted rides maybe is more adapted in that situation, both groups, say the other group is not fasting, they're control, there's no difference in exercise performance. And that's most likely because, exercise performance, especially in cycling, is highly dependent, as we talked about last week, on glycogen and being able to perform at high intensities. And when you're fasting, you don't have any glycogen, and as a result, your body is basically limited to performing at low intensity, zone 2. And so I think for the vast majority of people, especially cyclists, there's not really much sense in fasting. And like, obviously fasting is a very huge umbrella term for a lot of different things. My opinion, I think just extending your overnight fast on a daily basis can be beneficial, mainly for recovery, and just better quality sleep. I mean, we all know the feeling of, Thanksgiving dinner night where you go to bed super stuffed, like you don't sleep very well, and your body spends a lot of energy digesting all that food at night when it should be, spending that energy to recover, to repair muscle damage, to, decrease inflammation and all of that stuff. And so I think that eating dinner a little earlier, maybe having a little bit of a later breakfast, just expanding that window, to 10, 11 hours just on a daily basis is a really practical way to get some benefits of fasting without making your life a miserable, experience.
A miserable mess.
Yeah.
As we've said before, you are a Ferrari. You got to put gas in that Ferrari. That gas is carbohydrate. For the athlete that works out in the morning or works out midday, you got to eat before that. And for the athlete that works out like after work, you got to have lunch at least. And, you should probably have breakfast too. So because fasting gets so complicated so quick, I'm not a fan, because I believe in the KISS principle and just keep it simple. So, I recommend eating from the time you get up till about 1 hour before bed or sooner, kind of like what you're saying. And, fasting is just a good way to go slower.
Yeah, it undermines your performance and recovery because you can't dip into those high intensities. You can't do VO2 max or zone 4 intervals.
Yeah.
Fasted, like they're just going to be low quality efforts.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's easy to look at Team Sky and these pro athletes that are on
the ultra marathoners.
Yeah.
The Outside magazine has popularized the fasting.
Yeah, and people like Joe Rogan, and like there's a lot of stuff in the blogosphere and out there that's like not necessarily substantiated by the evidence, and so you have to be careful about that stuff. And I mean, again, if you want to try self-experimenting, knock yourself out, but I think you're going to quickly find that it's not going to be as enjoyable. And we actually had someone in our Facebook group share their experience about intermittent fasting. I don't know if you want to read that little quote.
I will. This is, to give you some background, this is from North, and North is a real world athlete, kids, job, training, right? And here's what he has to say about intermittent fasting. I tried intermittent fasting for a few months. At first, it was great. I dropped pounds really fast, especially off the middle where it counts, and it was nearly painless. I also felt mentally sharper in the morning before I ate my first meal. I felt lighter and leaner, and that felt wonderful. What's not to like? Smiley face. But then I started doing more and harder intervals. Should not have been enough to be overtrained, but I was still constantly tired and sore and under-recovered. So I tried eating normally again, and my recovery went back to normal, and I haven't looked back. I don't think it works very well for athletes when you are in hard training blocks. Ta-da!
Yeah, I think you and I are both on the same page that consistency when it comes to winning in the kitchen and fueling on the bike and training is the best way to, lose weight or be at a healthy weight to, increase your performance. I think a lot of people point to fasting as this silver bullet for weight loss and health, but if you're only eating one meal a day, it's going to be hard to eat enough calories to sustain yourself, and so as a result, you're going to drop that glycogen water weight. You're going to lose weight because you're eating less, but that is a very like short-term solution. Eventually the rubber band's going to snap and your performance is going to drop. So
yeah, performance, as we have been talking about, is dictated by 5-minute power outputs, 20-minute as hard as you can power outputs. That's when your body is burning glycogen, so you need to eat that. And then for weight loss, if that's your goal, really a better approach is probably winning in the kitchen, eating like your style of nutrition, but using the principles we talk about in our winning in the kitchen. Is probably not from fasting.
right. And maybe if you're training for like the DKXL or like the Silk Road gravel race in Kyrgyzstan, like multi-day, endurance stuff where you're not really going above zone 2, there might be some benefit to incorporating a little bit of fasted training in your routine. But again, these fasted rides aren't any more than like 2 hours in general, because you're still burning glycogen. You're even at those intensities. And so you're going to bonk, and so you have to be careful. But anyway, we don't need to beat that horse. All right. Next question from Donald in the private Facebook group. What is your opinion on using commuting as training?
This is a really good question.
It is.
And excuse me, I think where the etymology of this question comes from FTFPing, and the athlete wants to FTFP, and commuting is not in the plan because it's 2 rides a day, and I'm not a fan of two ride a day training. However, for logistics and for real world training, what you can do is follow your plan commuting to work. That's easy. You're done, get done with your bike ride, you do your workout, your intervals, you work, and then on the way home, you just ride home in like, how you feel, probably zone 1 or 2, and that's probably going to be a great training day. You FTFP'd, you probably arrive to work happier, you've accomplished your workout. The 7 successful habits of masters athletes is one of them. Those 7 is working out in the morning. You get your workout done before work. So start there. Do your intervals on the way to work, and then experiment with. Here's what you're going to run into here in the spring. The weather may be awful on the way to work, not good. And then good on the way home. I have one athlete in South Denver, and he uses a combination of the train and riding to work. So in other words, it's really cold when he goes to work, so he takes a train, but on the way home at 5:00, the weather's good, so he rides home and he does his workout. So Donald, I would experiment with that. And then one thing you want to really pay attention to is your recovery while you're doing that. And what I mean is, so you do your workout on the way to work, and then you work all day, you're tired, and then you're adding additional training stress by riding, let's call it 45 minutes on the way home. And then you wake up the next day and you're like, oh man, I'm tired. And so the thing to do would be try to remove that zone 2 ride on the way home. Definitely don't sweet spot on the way home if you have a hard workout the next day, because that's going to make your legs tired and impact your power output. So maybe experiment with a combination of public transport, the bus, or you could even experiment with just doing an active recovery ride on the way home, zone 1. And then you get home and then have your carbohydrate meal. You use that zone 1 ride commute home to open, warm up, like stretching or yoga, or really just kind of open up that carbohydrate window to have a really healthy, nutritious meal. And here's another thing. So you commute to work, do your workout on Tuesday morning, you ride home Tuesday afternoon, and then you wake up on Wednesday, and say you get on the bike and you're not feeling it, you can make a judgment call, and you can make that ride into work your recovery portion. Just make it as easy as possible. You work all day, and then on the way home, then you're going to do your workout. So there's some experimentation to kind of figure out the best way to recover from the workouts on your training plan, but still ride to work. And then a final thing, if you have a recovery day, so say it's Thursday and you're commuting to work, and the Friday is going to be a recovery day, and you're riding home. You do your workout on the way to work on Thursday morning. You work all day. You're getting ready to ride home. You're 15 minutes out of the parking lot. You're feeling great. The sun is shining. The birds are chirping. Go ahead and get a little extra TSS. Push it a little bit further. There's nothing to mess up the next day because it's a rest day. And I call that extra credit. And if you're feeling good and you can do that, that would be a thing about commuting. The other thing you want to consider with commuting is the length of commute. There's the really short commute, which is like, don't even put on cycling clothes and shoes. So let's call that like 15 minutes and less. That's going to have no impact on your training. And then there's the commute that's like 15 to 30 minutes. That's what I call the annoying commute. That's going to be just enough that it might make you feel tired. So be careful of that. And then there's like the 45, 60-minute bike ride commute, which you might as well just go ahead and ride. That's good endurance training. And if it gets you to work and it helps you not drive the car, just look at that as extra time. I mean, do your workout on the way to or from, and it can be a win-win.
Well, and just the quality too. I mean, I know a lot of commutes, like one of my coworkers at Rafa commutes in from like Westminster, like multiple times a week.
Yeah.
And the commute isn't, I mean, obviously it's like on the bike path, but so it's not a very, it would be hard to do like some sort of workout because you're dodging traffic. There's maybe traffic lights or tunnels. So some commutes are better than others. Some commutes are like, you live in the outskirts of town and you're just riding county roads into town, or you're trying to ride across a city in stop and go traffic and stoplights. So you have to also take that into consideration.
You can also take the long way to work.
Yeah.
So say you have this like 15-minute commute. That's kind of the annoying commute.
Yeah.
Take the long way to work, do your workout, and get to work and all is well. But then you take the short way home, and that's just a simple, fun, easy recovery ride.
Yeah. Cool.
Commuting is great.
Yeah. Save the planet.
That's right.
All right. Number 4 from Fred, or this is number 5 from Fred. Tabatas. Asking about Tabatas. Did I do the Tabatas right? Should I do them on erg mode? So he got through the first set of Tabatas and did 5 of 8 by the second set and was wrecked.
Okay. Yeah, great question. Tabatas. You say Tabata, I say Tabata.
Tomato kind of thing.
Tomato. So Tabatas are probably the most difficult workout around. I think, they're the hardest workout around. I mean, if you had to go, to down there, that's what you'd be doing.
Yeah.
If you went up to heaven, you'd be doing sweet spot all day long.
Yeah.
But they're hard, and unlike, and you do them at 170% of your FTP, and that's very, very challenging. A lot of like VO2 intervals and zone 6 1-minuters, you can adjust your effort so you can complete them, and that's what we recommend. But in order to get the physiological benefit of Tabatas, you want to do them at 170% of your FTP. And I think, so number one recommendation, don't go over 170%, but don't go under, and try to complete as many as you can. And I think Tabatas are one of the few workouts where you go to failure and you just call it good. And but the mere fact that you're going to failure is, that's good sports psychology. It trains your mental toughness, but that's the physiological benefit. You go up and you find your limit. You get as much benefit. You soak up as much as you can from that workout on that particular day. And then once you've failed, just zone 2, spin it, go home. And then when you go back and do another Tabata workout in the future, you can say, okay, last time I completed the first set and 5 of 8 on the second. Maybe this time I can complete both sets, or maybe 3 sets. If you can do 3 sets of 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, 8 reps per set, you're doing really well. And if you can accomplish that, you are very well conditioned and ready to race. So it's a very hard workout. Go to failure and then just try to do better the next time. If you do not get through the first set, I think you want to take a look at your FTP. if you've got it set correctly, or if you're going harder than 170% by chance. But very difficult workout. I heard a really good quote from the GU Pinnacle Energy podcast just yesterday. They were podcasting with Rebecca Rush, and she was saying how she did the Dirty Kansas XL, the 350-mile one, and she listened to Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance during the some of the 350 miles. And the quote was on whether it's hard or not. And tabatas are certainly hard. And the book goes on to say, it's not hard. It's not whether it's hard. It's having the right attitude that's hard. And I think that's the right way to approach tabatas and hard training and just cycling in general, is having the right attitude. Of course, it's going to be hard. Being hard is what makes you faster. And if you just have the right attitude about it, instead of dreading it or avoiding it, you're making yourself faster when you do your tabatas.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is not the best thing to say, but like, you're in the wrong sport if you don't like hard things.
That's right.
So, all right.
That's what shuffleboard is for.
Yeah, knitting.
Yeah.
All right, next question from Roxanne. She's been listening to the podcast. She remembers us talking about an expert in back pain. So what are your recommendations on easing back pain caused by cycling?
Great question. My biggest recommendation is from Dr. Eric Goodman, chiropractor in Southern California, and his Foundations videos. The most popular one, he's got a whole series of it, is if you Google or go to YouTube and type in Foundations, Dr. Eric Goodman, you're going to come up with a 12-minute routine that you can follow along. It's two of his athletes, and he's leading them through this Foundations back routine. And at the end of the video, he says, "Do this every day, no back pain ever." And I don't do it every day, but I have in the past, and it really strengthens your back. And for mountain bikers and cyclocrossers especially, it's absolutely imperative. It's in all of our training plans as a recovery activity on Mondays and Fridays. And it's 12 minutes of your life. There's no excuses not to do it. It's a free video. So again, no excuses. And if you have back pain and you don't want to have back pain, do this video every day. No back pain ever. And to explore that a little further, you can look at their YouTube channel, and they have a gazillion different varieties of it. But it's super good for your back. And for the roadies and the fondo and the gravel, when you're bent over, when you're in your drops for 4, 5, 6 hours, even you can benefit as well. It's for back strengthening.
I would just add to that, make sure you have a proper bike fit. That's a huge cause of any sort of pain, but of course back pain. So go get a professional bike fit. And if you're not seeing any progress, neither of us are chiropractors or doctors, so go see a doctor, someone that knows, a PT or a chiropractor or someone that is an expert in that world. They'll be able to help you out as well.
This is also the reason why full suspension bikes were invented or popularized, because the hardtail, it's like sitting on a jackhammer.
Slams your back.
Just that seat is coming up through your tailbone and just compressing your back with every single bump and jar. And full suspension bikes have a less of an impact. And this is generally why older mountain bikers like the full suspension. Young people too now. Does anyone ride a hardtail anymore?
I have some friends that ride hardtails. Yeah.
I'm kidding. I do too.
Oh.
And I raced a hardtail for 20 years, and then I rode my first full suspension, and it was like Cadillac.
All right. Next question from Aaron. Anyone have any tips out there they've had success with on muscle cramps in long events, particularly in the adductors?
Whew, I cramped up after the Rafa ride this past Sunday.
Really?
Yeah.
It's weird. I've only cramped in a race that I can remember once, and it was this past year at the Crusher and the Tusher.
Holy F.
I know.
Yeah.
For some reason, I've just never had any issues with cramping, and so it's weird. It seems like it's a very individualized issue.
Highly.
And so, some people just maybe are more prone to it.
They are.
But like, I think for the crusher, it's just like, it was such a hard, painful race that like I was feeling well and drinking enough. And I think that I just went hard, deep and like just in a different way than I had before. But the cramps only lasted for a little bit. But so, yeah, I don't really necessarily have any ideas. I know that obviously I can talk a little bit to the sports nutrition side of it, where a lot of people think that it has to do with electrolytes, and there's mixed data on that. But kind of the current latest theory and hypothesis about muscle cramps is that it's micro tears in the muscle,
the fascia
that causes it. And so it's like so it's hard to parse out whether it's dehydration or muscle failure, because those things are part and parcel, or they're very closely related. So if you're dehydrated, your muscles are going to get tired because your body is, having to work harder, and you're, not optimally fueling. On the flip side, if you're really freaking tired and you're smashing yourself up the coal to crush, you're going to get more dehydrated. So it's hard to figure out which one it is. So you can take steps to make sure you're well hydrated, make sure you're stretching and rolling out in between workouts. And, bike fit's probably a huge part of it too, because you want to be able to be efficient on the bike. And so anyway, that's my 2 cents.
So, I've got a long history of cramping up. When I used to play tennis in high school and in college, and this is before we knew about like electrolyte drink mix. I would drink 3 to 4 giant coolers of water in 100 degrees in the summer over the course of 3 hours, and you wonder why you cramp. No, but we sweated so much.
I know, but you're just like diluting the sodium in your body. That's like
what would happen. We would cramp, and then you'd go over to a teammate and be like, "Can you go get me some orange juice?" But I would cramp up so bad my hand would cramp holding the tennis racket.
Really?
Oh yeah.
You had to you couldn't you have to
could not let go of the racket, and the van rides on the way home from the matches when you're road tripping.
Yeah.
And you can't straighten out your leg. I would put my leg out the window to straighten it out. That's how bad you were cramping. And I had friends that got, carted off the court on a stretcher. They're dehydrated so bad. But that's digress. I have, over the years coaching athletes, there seems to be some athletes that cramp more than others, and others, don't cramp as much. Though you guys are the lucky ones, the ones that are more prone to cramping. They know it, and they've tried everything under the sun. So I have 5 tips related to cramping. But going back to muscle fascia and dehydration, there are some athletes that will cramp at the onset of difficulty of a race, way before it's too early to get dehydrated. And so I had an athlete cramp in the first 30 minutes of Leadville a couple years ago. And what's going on there? So I think cramping is caused by 2 things. And it's usually rarely one thing. They're often interrelated: dehydration. And then it's the release of the metabolic byproduct of exercise that's trapped in this muscle fascia. When you exercise and your muscle fascia binds up, it traps the lactate, the metabolic byproduct, in that fascia. And then when you exercise, you essentially warm up, and then you release that lactate, that metabolic byproduct. And then because it's such a release, it's like your muscles cramp up. And that's what happened to this athlete in the first 30 minutes of Leadville. And so how do you prevent that? And how do you prevent muscle fascia from binding up and trapping the metabolic byproducts of exercise? Well, you roll out your legs, you get regular massage, and you stretch. And this is the work that you got to do off the bike when you get done with riding.
Warming up too. I think a lot of people, whether it's a race or even just a normal training ride. I mean, one of the biggest things that I kind of learned from the guys at Revo this year was how important it is to get some muscle activation going before you train. So I've gotten into a habit of using the exercise band, doing the hydrants and the skaters before I ride, even just taking 5 minutes to just get the hips and glutes and, quads moving and get those muscles firing and activated and get some blood going. I mean, obviously with cycling, a a lot of times the very beginning of the ride is a warm up because you're riding easy and just kind of getting blood going. But, especially if you're doing a hard workout, it can be a big shock to the system to go from riding super easy to doing VO2 max intervals or a tabata or something, so get the systems firing.
Yeah.
Cycling is a very progressive based sport where you're kind of shifting up through these zones, which is going to, have an impact on the body. And of course it can cause a lot of muscle, fatigue.
They revolt. Come to think of it, speaking of that, there is no warm up in Leadville. You got to go to the corral. It's in the dark. You got to sit there for like more than you should for a warm up. So that could also be what's going on. So get a good warm up. I'm gonna add that into my 6th tip. But in addition to warming up, rolling out your legs with a foam roller, getting regular massage, stretching, pickle juice is another thing, ergogenic aid. Maybe Jackson knows about it. But 2 things. First of all, pickle juice is extremely rich in electrolytes. So you're going to replace electrolytes a lot. But you can't, once you start cramping, there's going to be a half-life of, replacing those electrolytes. So that's not going to be the answer. It's already too late.
Yeah.
However, I think there is a neuromuscular mechanism, a physiological mechanism where an active ingredient in the pickle juice gets down in the nervous system that stimulates the nerve to the point where it doesn't lock up the muscle. We need to
I don't know about this. Yeah, I'm curious.
That's why you see these, like, the 5 Hour Energy.
I know they make a pickle juice.
They make a pickle juice one, and it's all over the feed zones in Leadville.
I had a pickle. Yeah. I had a pickle on the Rafa ride. I think that's why I was crushing it so hard.
Probably. We'll go in and find
I'll check it out.
The science and include that in the show notes.
All right. Cool. That's all you got?
Yeah. Obviously what I just answered was in addition to drinking 1 to 2 bottles per hour with electrolyte drink mix. A lot of athletes get into the 4th hour or 5th hour of a ride and they start cramping, then it's 2 reasons. Not only are their muscles fatigued, they are also dehydrated. So it's rarely one thing. But yeah, you got to the other thing I forgot to mention, is if you haven't been doing intense training, interval training, a lot of athletes cramp up in the first couple races of the season. And it's because that is the first hard effort their body has seen in a year coming off of the off season. And their legs are just like, WTF, what are you doing to me? And they revolt and they cramp up. And that's a function of fatigue. It's not dehydration. But if you've been diligent, if you've been doing your intervals, your VO2s, your 1-minuters in training, if you've been doing hard group rides, that sort of fatigue is not going to happen. So you got to practice how you want to play.
Yeah, I was going to mention, I think that was a big reason why I cramped at the Crusher, was that in my Crusher gravel simulation rides, I wasn't going hard enough, going into the deep, dark depths of my mind and the pain cave.
Yeah.
On those rides, near the end of the ride. And so that's why, especially if you're doing long things like Leadville or any sort of these gravel races, you have to get used to going into that deep, dark place at the end of the ride, because that's where a lot of people are starting to cramp. Maybe they're getting fatigued, they're not, drinking enough or eating enough, and that's going to cause potentially some issues. So yeah, practice how you want to play.
Yeah, and go full gas on your intervals. Don't let the piece of software tell you what how hard you shouldn't go.
Yeah.
And then in your case, I know you're on the Crusher plan, and it's hard to simulate in training an hour-long climb. But for all those of you out there, you got to do your 10-minuters, your 5-minuters. You got to do some 20-minute full gas climbing intervals to get ready for that.
Yeah.
But in the end, that's why racing is sometimes the best training. And I do think doing a preparatory race prior to the Crusher is beneficial. And 2 years ago, someone asked me on the podcast this year in the Q&A what I'm doing differently from the Crusher. 2 years ago, the Crusher was my first race, and I did have a little bit of cramping. And one of the things I resolved to do better was to do a training race, to go really deep to, kind
of prime the system,
prevent that from happening. And I did a couple of training races in advance, and that seemed to help.
All right, so we're coming up on our last question from submissions. So if you are in the Facebook world watching this, start thinking about some questions to ask. We'll wrap up the podcast with the live Facebook questions. So start thinking about those as we answer this final question. All right. Yeah, do you have something to say?
I want to answer this one question that just came in to us from
Okay.
Tim. Tim asks, any thoughts on oval chain rings for TTs? So I know Tim, so I'm going to be able to answer with a little bit of inside knowledge. But thanks for your question, Tim. Ultimately, I think it comes down to your sustained power output. No, rings, no special equipment is going to give you the ability to make more power. Your training and what you have inside you is what you got. Oval rings, square rings, I kid. Really, oval rings have been popularized by Froomey and Wiggins. My brother rides oval rings. He likes them. I ultimately think it's a personal preference thing, but do not think for 1 minute that they increase your power output.
But if it's a placebo effect,
I think what it does, it feels
better
for your biomechanics, and that's a preference. But buying oval chain rings is not going to increase your FTP by 10, 20, 30 watts.
Save the money on the oval rings for a proper TT bike fit, so you can get more aero.
Trip to the wind tunnel.
Yeah.
Which I know Tim has done.
Okay. Well, then then we're getting into the marginal gains,
Yeah.
1%ers.
If it feels good to you, Tim, go for it. But just for our listeners out there, don't expect an increase in FTP from going out and buying rings.
Yeah. All right. So last question from Russ asks, he wants to know if he got the right plan for him. He's been ramping up with his previous plan to a current CTL of around 80. 700 to 800 TSS weeks. He noticed that the first week of this plan is about 400 TSS, and so his goal event is a 20K and 40K road race in June. So just wanted to make sure that he got the right plan.
Aha. Okay. Yeah. This goes back to our switching from base to race and using the performance manager chart for Masters Athletes podcast. So a couple of podcasts wrapped up into this one question. And what, a lot of athletes, they just think it's all about CTL building nonstop. And that couldn't be further from the truth. You want to build CTL during your base, but then when you start doing your intervals, as you switch from base to race, that's when your CTL should level out. And that's when you're going to see in your performance manager chart, when you apply your plan, or that's when your CTL should go from increasing. We need our whiteboard. Yeah. I miss my whiteboard. You want to go from increasing your CTL during base to leveling it off and plateauing while you're doing your intervals to give preference to your raw power output and your recovery. And so to accomplish that, your total weekly TSSs are going to be much smaller than when you were doing your sweet spot training and trying to build your CTL. And so, your first week in the plan of doing only 400 TSS is about right. You're still leveling off from doing those, like what you said, the 700 to 800 TSS weeks. So change your mindset a little bit, focus on those full gas intervals, really, really go hard, take more recovery days, because that's what your training is calling for, and do not chase the TSS. Do not try to build CTL. Just look at your raw power output, and are you progressing from week to week?
All right. In the comments on Facebook, Sean asks, last week you talked about hourly caloric intake, but didn't talk about carbohydrates per hour. Is there a specific amount of carbohydrates per hour to make sure you get? Thanks for the great info. Go back and listen to that podcast again. We definitely did talk about carbohydrates per hour.
I'm going to pull it up right now.
Yeah, it's about that 60 to 90 grams per hour. If you're doing like anything around, long rides, 5 hours. But if you're doing, again, all of this is individualized depending on what kind of intensity you're doing, what kind of duration. But if you go back to that training tip or the blog or the podcast on the website, fastcatcoaching.com/tips, you can look at this post called What to Eat on the Bike During Training and Racing. We have it in bold. the recommendations. So
we're looking at it right now.
Yeah. Less than 2 hours, 45 grams of carbohydrates per hour. 2 to 5 hours, 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. 5+ hours are sort of like these big ultra endurance racing training, 60 to 90 grams. And that's going to vary a little bit depending on how much you weigh, how much, you are, or how hard you're going for that duration. But yeah, that's what we recommend.
Yeah. Good question. Thanks for asking. Okay. So that's all the questions that we have today, unless, we want to get any Hail Marys in here on the Facebook group. We'll gladly take your questions. It's not too late.
Did we want to mention YouTube Live coming up in the future?
Yeah, sure. So, we can stream these live podcasts on YouTube. If everyone obviously is watching this on Facebook, probably wants to stay on Facebook, but out there in podcast land, if you want to see the live version on our YouTube channel, let us know. The technology is there.
Yeah.
Kind of like the $1 Million Man.
Yeah.
Did you watch that show?
No. But I mean, what's cool about the YouTube Live is that you don't have to have a YouTube account. Like, you can watch the YouTube Live even if you don't have Facebook or you don't have YouTube. You can just go onto the link and
you can watch these.
Oh, really?
These live Facebook things, they live on the FasCat Coaching Facebook page.
But can you access that if you aren't a Facebook member?
No.
So that's what I mean. So if you're not, like, you can, if you're not on Facebook,
you got to get on Facebook.
Yeah. You can watch the YouTube. Anyone can watch it.
Right.
know? So
that's +1 in the YouTube column.
True.
Okay. Anne asks, what are some examples of blocks versus bars? Trying to catch up on the nutrition podcast.
So many options.
Why don't we...